President Trump mocks Lesotho, a critical analysis of the U.S.-Africa relations and impact on global aid. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we bring you the latest in African news, insightful analysis, and a bold perspective on global affairs. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today we're discussing a controversial moment from U.S. President Donald Trump's recent speech, where he mocked Lesotho, calling it a country nobody has ever heard of. What does this tell us about Africa's position in global conversations? Let's break it down. In a recent address to Congress, U.S. President Donald Trump mocked the tiny African nation of Lesotho, calling it a country nobody has ever heard of. His comments, which were made while discussing his administration's drastic cuts to foreign aid, are reflective of the broader disdain for African nations that has marked much of his political rhetoric. While the comments drew laughter from Republican lawmakers, they also sparked outrage, particularly given the critical role that the United States has played in addressing global health crises in Africa. The context of Trump's remarks on Lesotho. Trump's remarks came as part of a broader defense of his administration's foreign policy, which has been heavily criticized for its disregard for the importance of global partnerships, especially with African nations. He cited, among other examples, a past U.S. initiative aimed at promoting LGBTQI+ rights in Lesotho, a country that has faced serious health challenges, including one of the highest HIV/AIDS rates in the world. While Trump struggled with the pronunciation of Lesotho, his implication was clear: the nation, tucked within South Africa, was inconsequential, and its struggles with HIV/AIDS were an afterthought in his administration's agenda. Lesotho, a constitutional monarchy in southern Africa, has been one of the primary beneficiaries of U.S. foreign assistance, particularly in terms of health aid. Since 2006, the U.S. government has committed over $630 million to combat HIV/AIDS in the country. This funding, which has been critical in providing medication and social support, includes efforts aimed at raising awareness around LGBTQI+ issues in a region where sexual minorities face significant stigma. The larger picture of U.S.-Africa relations. Trump's mocking of Lesotho is part of a broader trend in his foreign policy that often undermines the importance of African nations on the global stage. His administration's decision to reduce foreign aid, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, has had profound implications. Under the leadership of Trump, the U.S. foreign assistance budget has been drastically slashed, including cuts to funding for public health initiatives, democracy-building programs, and other development projects. One of the most notable casualties has been the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, which has seen its influence and funding diminish significantly during Trump's time in office. Trump's approach to Africa contrasts sharply with the foreign policies of previous U.S. administrations, which emphasized partnerships and collaboration with African countries on issues such as health, education, and economic development. Under President Barack Obama, for instance, the United States worked to strengthen ties with African nations through initiatives like Power Africa, which aim to increase electricity access across the continent, and the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which promoted trade relations. Furthermore, Trump's lack of interest in African affairs was starkly highlighted by a controversial 2018 remark, when he allegedly referred to several African nations as shithole countries during a private meeting with lawmakers. This statement was widely condemned by African leaders and led to a diplomatic fallout, further exacerbating tensions between the U.S. and various African nations. The impact of Trump's foreign aid cuts. The ramifications of Trump's cuts to foreign aid extend far beyond his mocking comments about Lesotho. For countries like Lesotho, where HIV/AIDS continues to pose a significant public health challenge, the withdrawal of U.S. support could have catastrophic consequences. The U.S. has long been a leader in global health initiatives, and its absence in addressing HIV/AIDS in countries like Lesotho could lead to a resurgence of the epidemic, exacerbating the already high rates of infection in the region. The cancellation of over 90% of U.S. foreign aid by the Trump administration is particularly concerning given the deepening health crises across much of Africa. The United States Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, a government agency that provides large-scale development funding to countries meeting democratic and governance standards, had committed $300 million to Lesotho in 2022 to promote health and agricultural growth. However, the Trump administration's cuts jeopardize such crucial projects, potentially stalling progress in countries like Lesotho. Comparing U.S.-Africa relations under different administrations, Trump's administration stands in stark contrast to the policies of previous presidents, particularly when it comes to Africa. President George W. Bush's leadership, for example, saw the introduction of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, a highly successful initiative that contributed billions of dollars toward the fight against HIV/AIDS across Africa. PEPFAR has been credited with saving millions of lives and stabilizing the health infrastructure in many African countries. Similarly, President Obama's YALI, Young African Leaders Initiative, sought to engage and empower the next generation of African leaders, fostering greater cooperation between the U.S. and Africa on various issues, from entrepreneurship to education and governance. In contrast, Trump's disengagement from Africa has been characterized by an indifference to issues of human rights, development, and global cooperation. The administration's focus on transactional relations, prioritizing trade deals and military partnerships, has sidelined more nuanced diplomatic engagements aimed at improving life on the continent. The future of U.S.-Africa relations and global aid. Looking ahead, the question remains whether the U.S. will continue its trend of neglecting Africa in favor of pursuing a America First agenda, or whether future administrations will work to restore relationships with African nations. The Biden administration, for instance, has signaled a more engaged and collaborative approach to Africa. Biden's commitment to rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and pledging to address global health issues, including HIV/AIDS, indicates a potential shift in U.S. foreign policy towards re-establishing partnerships with African countries. However, even with a shift in leadership, the long-term impact of Trump's policies on U.S.-Africa relations remains to be seen. The damage to diplomatic ties, economic cooperation, and public health initiatives caused by Trump's administration will require significant effort to undo. African countries, meanwhile, are increasingly looking to diversify their relationships with other global powers, particularly China, which has invested heavily in Africa's infrastructure and economic development. This pivot could lead to a weakening of the U.S.'s influence on the continent, further complicating efforts to re-establish constructive partnerships. Trump's recent mockery of Lesotho, while seemingly inconsequential to his administration, reflects a larger trend of undermining U.S.-Africa relations. Through deep cuts to foreign aid, disregard for global health issues, and an overall indifference to African affairs, the former president's policies have left a lasting imprint on the U.S.'s relationship with the continent. As we look forward, it is imperative for the next generation of leadership, both in Africa and the United States, to reassess these relationships and prioritize meaningful cooperation that can address the continent's pressing challenges. A shift toward China and the rest of the world. One of the major shifts in Africa's global relationships over the past few decades has been the growing influence of China. While the U.S. has historically been a key partner in Africa's development, China's role on the continent has expanded exponentially in recent years. Through massive investments in infrastructure projects, loans for development, and an aggressive trade policy, China has positioned itself as a central player in Africa's economic and political landscape. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, for example, has connected many African nations to Chinese markets, offering both opportunities and challenges. For many African countries, the Chinese model of cooperation, based on mutual economic benefit rather than political conditions, has been an attractive alternative to the more conditional foreign aid offered by the United States and other Western countries. China's commitment to infrastructure development, without imposing the same democratic and human rights standards that often accompany U.S. aid, has led many African nations to turn to China for funding and development assistance. In fact, the shift toward China is evident in the growing number of African leaders who visit Beijing for meetings and negotiations, further solidifying the economic and diplomatic ties between Africa and China. This rising Chinese influence presents both an opportunity and a challenge for Africa. On one hand, Chinese investments have spurred economic growth in many regions of the continent, particularly in infrastructure, energy, and technology. On the other hand, some critics argue that the Chinese approach lacks the transparency, governance oversight, and emphasis on human rights that the U.S. and other Western powers traditionally require of their African partners. Furthermore, the growing debt burden in some African nations due to Chinese loans has raised concerns about long-term economic stability and dependence on Chinese capital. The role of multilateral organizations and global cooperation beyond bilateral relations. Multilateral organizations such as the United Nations, UN, and the African Union, AU, continue to play an important role in shaping Africa's future. The UN has been involved in various peacekeeping missions and humanitarian efforts across the continent, while the AU has worked to strengthen intra-Africa trade and cooperation through initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, which aims to create a single market for goods and services across the continent. For the U.S., a renewed focus on multilateralism may provide a more effective approach to re-engage with African nations. President Biden's foreign policy has already signaled a greater commitment to multilateral cooperation, whether through rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement or reaffirming support for the global fight against COVID-19. However, given the current geopolitical dynamics, including the rising influence of China and Russia in Africa, the U.S. may find it increasingly difficult to reassert its leadership on the continent without working through multilateral organizations and collaborative partnerships. Africa's internal challenges, governance, and political stability. While external factors such as foreign aid and international partnerships are crucial, the internal challenges faced by African nations, such as corruption, political instability, and poor governance, remain significant barriers to development. Many African countries still grapple with weak institutions, a lack of transparency, and the rise of authoritarian leaders who undermine democratic principles. The recent democratic backslides in countries like Uganda, Ethiopia, and Cameroon serve as reminders that the fight for political stability in Africa is ongoing. The importance of good governance cannot be overstated in any discussion about Africa's future. In the context of U.S. foreign aid, one of the key benchmarks for receiving assistance has been a nation's commitment to democratic governance and human rights. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, for example, provides substantial funding to countries that meet specific democratic, economic, and governance criteria. However, as aid levels decrease and the global balance of power shifts, African nations must ensure that they are holding their governments accountable and maintaining democratic practices to ensure their future prosperity. In this light, the role of civil society and grassroots organizations becomes even more critical. Across the continent, youth movements and civil society organizations have been at the forefront of calls for democratic reform, justice, and accountability. From the End SARS movement in Nigeria to the protests against government corruption in Sudan and Zimbabwe, African citizens are increasingly demanding that their governments prioritize transparency and equitable development. The strategic importance of Africa to the U.S. Despite Trump's apparent disregard for African nations, the strategic importance of Africa to the U.S. cannot be ignored. Africa is home to some of the world's fastest-growing economies, and its young, dynamic population presents significant opportunities for American businesses, particularly in sectors like technology, energy, and agriculture. Additionally, Africa is increasingly becoming a geopolitical battleground, with global powers like China, Russia, and the European Union vying for influence. The U.S. cannot afford to overlook the strategic significance of Africa, especially in the context of growing global competition. As the world's second-largest continent by land area and home to 1.3 billion people, Africa has immense potential in terms of resources, human capital, and geopolitical positioning. By ignoring Africa, the U.S. risks losing out on opportunities for trade, investment, and diplomatic influence that could prove valuable in the coming decades. Moreover, with the increasing frequency of transnational challenges, such as terrorism, climate change, and pandemic, collaboration between Africa and the U.S. is essential. The U.S. military's involvement in counterterrorism efforts across the Sahel and East Africa, as well as its partnership with African nations in peacekeeping operations, underscores the security concerns that link the continent to the U.S. Ignoring Africa's strategic importance could leave the U.S. vulnerable to the negative effects of instability, conflict, and failed states. Moving forward, rebuilding the relationship. As the U.S. looks ahead, there is an opportunity to rebuild and reframe its relationship with Africa, one that acknowledges the continent's importance on the world stage while also addressing the critical challenges it faces. The U.S. should consider a more engaged and empathetic approach to foreign policy, one that prioritizes the interests of the African people and supports local governance, development, and democratic institutions. For this to happen, the U.S. must move beyond the transactional approach that Trump championed and embrace a more comprehensive strategy that includes economic support, human rights advocacy, and partnerships on issues such as climate change, security, and trade. Additionally, fostering stronger ties with African nations through people-to-people diplomacy, cultural exchanges, and educational programs would help rebuild trust and deepen cooperation. The need for a balanced and thoughtful approach. The remarks made by Donald Trump about Lesotho were more than just a passing comment. They reflected a broader foreign policy vision that left Africa on the periphery. However, the evolving geopolitical landscape presents a chance for future U.S. leadership to correct course and work towards a more constructive and mutually beneficial relationship with African nations. The complexities of Africa's relationships with the U.S., China, and other global powers will continue to unfold in the coming years. As Africa rises as a key player on the world stage, it is crucial that the U.S. aligns its policies to reflect the importance of these partnerships, both in terms of economic growth and geopolitical stability. While Trump's era of neglect may have left scars on U.S.-Africa relations, there is potential for healing and renewed cooperation, provided that both sides are willing to engage in a more balanced and forward-looking approach. The conversation about Africa's future in the global arena is far from over. In fact, it is only just the beginning, and as we move forward, it is essential to keep in mind the role that the U.S. and other powers can play in shaping the continent's trajectory in the years to come. The future of U.S.-Africa relations. Key areas for engagement. Looking ahead, there are several critical areas where the United States can re-engage with Africa, provided the right political will and strategies are in place. These areas, ranging from economic development to tackling climate change, offer ample opportunities for meaningful collaboration that could have a lasting impact on both Africa and the U.S. 1. Economic development and trade partnerships. For many African nations, economic development remains a major challenge, but also an area of tremendous opportunity. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, which went into effect in 2021, aims to create a single market for goods and services across the continent, stimulating intra-Africa trade and improving economic integration. The U.S. can play a significant role in this initiative by supporting trade policies that are mutually beneficial and strengthening the business environment in African countries. U.S. businesses stand to benefit from greater access to Africa's growing consumer market, which is expected to double to 2.5 billion people by 2050. As the continent's population continues to urbanize, demand for consumer goods, services, and infrastructure will rise, creating opportunities for American companies in sectors like energy, technology, telecommunications, and manufacturing. However, for these opportunities to be fully realized, the U.S. must adjust its trade policies to reflect the new realities of African economic development. The creation of trade frameworks that allow American companies to expand in Africa while fostering local industry development will help ensure a sustainable and equitable relationship. A greater emphasis on technology transfers, the development of African startups, and investment in infrastructure projects could go a long way in strengthening the trade ties between Africa and the U.S. 2. Health and climate change collaboration. The COVID-19 pandemic underscored the interdependence of the world's nations in combating global health crises. The U.S., through initiatives like PEPFAR and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, has made significant contributions to health programs in Africa. However, there is much more that could be done to build long-term health resilience across the continent, particularly considering emerging health threats, climate change, and limited access to healthcare infrastructure. One area that demands urgent attention is climate change. Africa is among the most vulnerable regions in the world to the impacts of climate change, yet it is responsible for only a fraction of global emissions. Extreme weather patterns, droughts, flooding, and desertification have already threatened food security and livelihoods across vast swaths of the continent. Collaborative efforts between the U.S. and African nations to address the effects of climate change could have transformative outcomes. The Biden administration's commitment to re-entering the Paris Agreement provides an opportunity to strengthen U.S.-Africa climate change initiatives. Investing in clean energy projects, supporting African countries' efforts to adapt to climate challenges, and improving disaster resilience could form the backbone of a new, collaborative partnership between Africa and the U.S. Moreover, addressing the environmental degradation that has contributed to migration and resource conflicts in parts of Africa can enhance stability and security across the continent. 3. Security cooperation and counterterrorism efforts. Africa faces several security challenges, with terrorist groups like Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and ISIS operating across parts of the continent. The U.S. has long been involved in supporting African security forces through training programs and counterterrorism efforts. However, the approach to security cooperation has often been fragmented and reactive. Moving forward, the U.S. needs to invest in a more holistic approach to security in Africa, one that goes beyond military aid and counterterrorism assistance. This means strengthening institutions of governance, improving the rule of law, and ensuring that African security forces have the tools they need to protect civilians and fight terrorism effectively. The U.S. must also consider the broader context of the political instability and economic challenges that fuel extremism in parts of Africa. By focusing on strengthening the state's legitimacy, promoting inclusive governance, and supporting African-led peacekeeping missions, the U.S. can help African countries develop their own long-term security solutions. Encouraging regional collaboration, particularly through the African Union, AU, and other multilateral organizations, will also be key to ensuring the success of these initiatives. 4. Supporting democracy and governance. One of the most important ways the U.S. can assist Africa is by helping to foster democracy and good governance across the continent. Many African nations have made strides in strengthening democratic institutions, yet challenges remain. Corruption, authoritarianism, and the suppression of political opposition are all factors that undermine the quality of governance in parts of Africa. The U.S. has a vital role to play in promoting democratic norms and supporting efforts to combat corruption and strengthen institutions of governance. In the past, programs like the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, have supported countries in Africa that meet specific democratic and governance criteria. Moving forward, the U.S. should expand these programs with a focus on improving electoral processes, protecting press freedoms, and supporting civil society organizations that advocate for accountability and transparency. The U.S. must also be willing to engage with African leaders who are genuinely committed to democratic values, rather than simply pursuing transactional relationships with those in power. This means prioritizing the voices of opposition leaders, civil society groups, and young people who represent Africa's future. 5. education, technology, and innovation. The future of Africa is inextricably linked to its youth population. With more than 60% of Africa's population under the age of 25, investing in education and innovation is critical for the continent's long-term success. The U.S. can partner with African countries to improve access to quality education, particularly in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, which will equip young people with the skills needed to thrive in a rapidly changing world. Moreover, Africa's burgeoning tech industry, particularly in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, represents a significant opportunity for the U.S. to engage with the continent. By investing in African startups, supporting innovation hubs, and promoting digital literacy, the U.S. can help cultivate the next generation of African tech entrepreneurs. This would not only benefit Africa's economy, but also create new avenues for U.S. businesses to collaborate with African innovators. As the digital economy continues to grow, there are tremendous opportunities for the U.S. and Africa to work together in fields such as fintech, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy technology. By supporting digital infrastructure and entrepreneurship in Africa, the U.S. can help position the continent as a global leader in technology and innovation. Renewing a vital partnership. As we look to the future, the U.S. and Africa must move beyond the rhetoric and political blunders of the past. While Trump's administration may have strained U.S.-Africa relations, the global realities of trade, security, and climate change require that both sides come together to forge a new partnership based on mutual respect, shared interests, and long-term goals. In the coming years, the U.S. must actively seek to rebuild and deepen its engagement with Africa, placing a renewed emphasis on democratic governance, economic cooperation, public health, and climate action. For Africa, the challenge will be to harness its own resources and leadership to ensure that partnerships with global powers, whether the US, China, or others, benefit the African people, promote development, and ensure a sustainable future. The future of US-Africa relations remains full of potential, but it requires careful, strategic planning and a commitment to mutual prosperity. With the right focus, cooperation, and investment, both the U.S. and Africa can shape a future of shared growth, security, and innovation that benefits people on both sides of the Atlantic and beyond. The next chapter in this relationship is just beginning. Africa's strategic position in global geopolitics. One of the fundamental aspects that will define the future of U.S.-Africa relations is Africa's growing importance in global geopolitics. As global power dynamics shift, Africa's role as a crucial player in international trade, security, and politics becomes more evident. The continent's vast natural resources, young population, and strategic position between major trade routes make it an area of increasing interest to global powers beyond the US and China, including the European Union, Russia, and India. 1. Africa's natural resources, a critical asset in global trade. Africa is rich in resources essential for the global economy, including oil, precious minerals, and agricultural products. Many of these resources are indispensable for technology production, including rare earth metals that are crucial for electronics and renewable energy technologies. With the growing demand for such resources, Africa has the potential to become even more central in global trade networks. Countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, South Africa, and Zambia have some of the world's largest deposits of minerals like cobalt and copper, both of which are essential for electric vehicle production and other high-tech industries. The competition to secure access to these resources is fierce, and African nations are increasingly leveraging their natural wealth as a tool for diplomatic bargaining. For the U.S., securing these resources while fostering ethical supply chains is critical. The U.S. can play an active role in ensuring that African countries are not exploited in the process, and that the natural wealth of the continent is used to support local development. This requires a shift from transactional extractive relationships to partnerships that promote sustainable development, environmental protection, and local job creation. 2. The rise of Africa as a market and investment hub. Africa is often referred to as the next frontier for economic growth, with the World Bank predicting that the continent will see rapid economic expansion in the coming decades. With a young, dynamic population and an increasingly urbanized society, Africa is rapidly becoming a consumer market for a wide range of goods and services. As the middle class expands, there will be greater demand for products ranging from smartphones and cars to financial services and healthcare. This emerging market offers significant opportunities for U.S. businesses looking to expand their global reach. However, to capitalize on these opportunities, the U.S. needs to shift from a traditional donor-recipient mindset to one focused on fostering economic partnerships. Rather than focusing solely on aid, the U.S. should encourage investment, entrepreneurship, and trade agreements that open up new avenues for African businesses to thrive while also creating jobs and economic opportunities. African nations also need to develop the capacity to harness the opportunities in their own markets. This means improving infrastructure, developing stronger financial systems, and ensuring that small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, have the resources and skills needed to compete in a global economy. The U.S., through initiatives like the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, has already taken steps to support African businesses, but more targeted efforts are necessary to foster innovation and entrepreneurship at scale. 3. The political landscape, navigating Africa's complex terrain. Africa is home to a diverse range of political systems, from democracies to autocracies, with varying degrees of governance and stability. The political landscape is further complicated by the rise of regional conflicts, political instability, and threats of extremism in some parts of the continent. However, Africa's political complexity also presents an opportunity for the U.S. to engage with a wide variety of political systems and actors, each with its own needs, priorities, and aspirations. In recent years, there has been a wave of democratic progress across many parts of Africa. Countries like Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa have made strides in strengthening democratic institutions, upholding human rights, and promoting rule of law. However, challenges remain, particularly with countries like Sudan, Zimbabwe, and Ethiopia, experiencing political and civil unrest. In some cases, long-term leaders have undermined democratic processes, leading to a decline in political freedoms and human rights. The U.S. can play a pivotal role in supporting Africa's democratic aspirations. This could involve providing diplomatic support to countries undergoing democratic transitions, offering technical assistance to strengthen electoral processes, and collaborating with civil society organizations that advocate for human rights and transparency. Additionally, the U.S. can support initiatives aimed at increasing political participation and reducing youth disenfranchisement, which is a key driver of political instability in some African nations. However, the U.S. must also acknowledge that Africa's political trajectory is not a one-size-fits-all approach. The continent's diversity means that solutions must be tailored to the specific political and cultural contexts of each nation. While democracy and governance support are important, so too is the recognition of African sovereignty and the right of African nations to determine their own political paths. 4. Security challenges and opportunities for cooperation. Security remains a primary concern for many African nations, with ongoing challenges such as terrorism, civil wars, and regional conflicts. From the Sahel region to East Africa, instability and violence have undermined development efforts and posed significant risks to both African and global security. Groups like Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and ISIS have exploited fragile states, using them as breeding grounds for extremism and violence. The U.S. has played a role in counter-terrorism efforts, particularly in West and East Africa, through initiatives like the Trans-Sahara Counterterrorism Partnership and the Africa Command, AFRICOM. While the U.S. has provided valuable military training and support to African security forces, it is essential that this support be part of a larger, more comprehensive strategy that addresses the root causes of extremism, such as poverty, lack of education, and weak governance. Going forward, the U.S. should strengthen its partnership with African nations to combat terrorism and extremism through a combination of military, diplomatic, and development efforts. A key element of this strategy should be enhancing the capabilities of African security forces while also ensuring that security measures are conducted in a manner that respects human rights and the rule of law. In addition to counterterrorism efforts, regional security cooperation is increasingly important in tackling cross-border issues such as organized crime, human trafficking, and piracy. Strengthening regional cooperation mechanisms, such as the African Standby Force, can help African countries address these challenges more effectively. The U.S. can play a role by supporting these regional initiatives and facilitating information sharing and joint operations. Shaping a progressive U.S.-Africa partnership. As we look toward the future, the U.S. and Africa have much to gain from a more balanced and thoughtful relationship. Africa's strategic significance in global trade, security, and governance cannot be overstated, and the U.S. must recognize the continent's growing role in shaping the world's future. The challenges facing Africa are considerable, but so are the opportunities for collaboration. For the U.S., the future of its relationship with Africa will depend on its ability to adapt to a changing global landscape. This means moving beyond the transactional approach that has characterized much of U.S. foreign policy in Africa and towards a more inclusive, mutually beneficial partnership. Whether through trade, security cooperation, health initiatives, or addressing the impacts of climate change, there are countless opportunities for the U.S. and Africa to work together. The political, economic, and social developments of the coming years will determine the trajectory of U.S.-Africa relations. With the right strategies in place, both sides can navigate the complexities of this relationship and build a future that benefits both Africa and the U.S., as well as the broader global community. As Africa continues to rise on the world stage, the time for thoughtful, strategic engagement is now. Enhancing people-to-people engagements. The role of cultural diplomacy. One of the often overlooked dimensions of U.S.-Africa relations is the importance of cultural diplomacy. While government-to-government engagements are crucial, people-to-people interactions can foster deeper understanding, respect, and long-term collaboration. Africa's cultural heritage is rich and diverse, with a profound impact on global music, art, literature, and fashion. The U.S. has the opportunity to engage with Africa on cultural exchanges, partnerships, and educational programs that go beyond traditional diplomatic relations. Cultural diplomacy initiatives can facilitate mutual understanding by breaking down stereotypes and challenging misconceptions. Programs that promote African culture in the U.S., whether through art exhibitions, music festivals, film screenings, or educational exchanges, can create lasting bonds between the two continents. By investing in these initiatives, the U.S. can build goodwill and foster stronger ties with Africa's youth, who represent the future of the continent. The African diaspora in the U.S. also plays a crucial role in bridging the gap between the two regions. African immigrants have contributed significantly to the cultural, social, and economic fabric of American society, and they can serve as important ambassadors in strengthening U.S.-Africa relations. The African diaspora's knowledge of both the U.S. and Africa offers unique opportunities for creating partnerships that can positively impact both continents. Additionally, expanding access to educational exchanges and scholarships for African students to study in the U.S. is an investment in the next generation of African leaders and professionals. These individuals often return to their home countries with the skills and networks needed to contribute to national development and foster global cooperation. The U.S. can further build upon existing initiatives such as the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, and create new programs that focus on leadership development, entrepreneurship, and social innovation. Africa's role in global security, the geopolitical implications. In the rapidly evolving global geopolitical landscape, Africa's strategic position continues to gain prominence. As global competition for influence in Africa intensifies, especially with the growing presence of China, Russia, and even regional powers, the U.S. must recognize the importance of supporting Africa's security and sovereignty. The rise of China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and Russia's growing military presence on the continent are a testament to Africa's increasing significance in the global order. Africa's role in global security is multifaceted, encompassing peacekeeping efforts, counterterrorism initiatives, and the management of regional conflicts. The African Union, AU, has made strides in peacekeeping, often deploying forces to conflict zones such as Darfur, Somalia, and South Sudan. However, the AU faces significant challenges in terms of financing, coordination, and logistical support for its peacekeeping missions. The U.S., in collaboration with other Western and African partners, can play an instrumental role in enhancing the AU's capacity to respond to security threats and ensure stability on the continent. The growing threat of violent extremism, especially in regions like the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, also demands a coordinated and comprehensive approach. The U.S. can partner with African countries to improve their counterterrorism capabilities, providing support for intelligence sharing, training, and capacity building. However, effective counterterrorism efforts must be rooted in a broader strategy that addresses the socio-economic drivers of extremism, including unemployment, lack of education, and governance challenges. Building sustainable partnerships, the importance of development aid. While Africa's relationship with global powers is shifting, the role of development aid remains an essential component of U.S.-Africa relations. However, the nature of development aid is evolving. In the past, aid was often given without long-term sustainability in mind, sometimes creating dependency or failing to reach its full potential. As African economies continue to grow, the emphasis should shift from aid dependency to partnerships that focus on sustainable development, local capacity building, and self-reliance. The U.S. has an opportunity to be a leader in promoting development models that prioritize sustainability, job creation, and local economic empowerment. Rather than providing one-off aid packages, the U.S. can focus on supporting African nations in developing their own economic models, driven by entrepreneurship, innovation, and inclusive policies. Public-private partnerships, PPPs, can be an effective means of ensuring that aid is used efficiently, with the private sector contributing to long-term economic growth and job creation. Additionally, development aid should be aligned with the priorities of African nations themselves. African countries must take ownership of their development strategies, ensuring that they reflect the needs and aspirations of their people. The U.S., through agencies like USAID, can work alongside African governments to support these homegrown solutions while ensuring that projects are inclusive, transparent, and aligned with global sustainability goals. The role of technology and innovation in shaping. Africa's future technology and innovation are transforming every aspect of life in Africa. With the rise of digital economies, mobile technology, and fintech, Africa is positioning itself as a hub for technological advancements. In countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, mobile money platforms such as M-Pesa have revolutionized financial inclusion, enabling millions of people to access banking services for the first time. The U.S. can play a pivotal role in supporting Africa's burgeoning tech industry by fostering partnerships in technology, education, and entrepreneurship. By investing in Africa's tech ecosystem, the U.S. can help nurture homegrown innovation that meets the unique needs of the continent. Supporting African startups, providing access to venture capital, and collaborating with local entrepreneurs can unlock immense economic potential. The U.S. tech industry, particularly Silicon Valley, has a wealth of knowledge and resources that could benefit African tech hubs as they scale their solutions to address local challenges, such as healthcare access, education, and agricultural productivity. Moreover, technology can be a powerful tool for addressing some of Africa's most pressing challenges. For example, AI and big data are being used to combat disease outbreaks, improve agricultural yields, and optimize supply chains. By partnering with African governments and businesses, the U.S. can help scale these solutions and create a digital economy that drives sustainable growth. Strengthening regional cooperation, Africa's strategic alliances. As the U.S. seeks to re-establish itself as a key partner to Africa, it must recognize the importance of regional cooperation on the continent. The African Union, AU, and regional organizations such as the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and the East African Community, EAC, have been at the forefront of promoting peace, security, and economic development across Africa. These institutions play an essential role in addressing intra-Africa issues, from conflict resolution to trade facilitation. The U.S. can strengthen these regional organizations by providing support for their institutional development, governance reforms, and capacity building. By working alongside African regional bodies, the U.S. can help foster a more cohesive and integrated Africa, where trade barriers are reduced, regional conflicts are prevented, and development efforts are coordinated more effectively. Additionally, Africa's strategic alliances with global powers like China, Russia, and India must be viewed through the lens of cooperation rather than competition. Rather than attempting to outbid other countries for influence in Africa, the U.S. can embrace a collaborative approach that encourages multilateral solutions to global challenges. Whether it's addressing climate change, promoting peace, or advancing sustainable development, Africa's future will depend on the ability of global powers to work together for the common good. The path toward mutual prosperity. The future of U.S.-Africa relations holds immense potential, and the opportunities for collaboration are vast. From economic partnerships and technological innovation to security cooperation and cultural diplomacy, both sides have much to gain from a renewed focus on mutual respect and long-term strategic partnerships. The U.S., recognizing Africa's growing importance in global geopolitics, must embrace a forward-thinking approach that prioritizes sustainable development, democratic governance, and the empowerment of African people. For Africa, the challenge is to harness the opportunities provided by global partnerships while ensuring that its own development priorities are at the forefront. The continent's young population, natural resources, and expanding markets are key assets that, if leveraged correctly, can lead to unprecedented growth and prosperity. The task ahead is clear: to forge a partnership based on equality, shared interests, and mutual respect. As the world enters a new era of geopolitical competition and collaboration, the U.S. and Africa must look beyond past tensions and work together to build a future that benefits both regions. By doing so, they will not only transform their own futures, but also contribute to a more stable, prosperous, and interconnected world. The potential for a dynamic and productive U.S.-Africa relationship is within reach, but it requires a renewed commitment to collaboration, partnership, and forward-thinking solutions. Emphasizing education and capacity building in Africa. As Africa continues its development journey, education remains one of the most powerful tools for transforming the continent. Access to quality education is directly linked to long-term economic growth, social stability, and innovation. The U.S. has the opportunity to partner with African countries in improving educational systems at all levels, from primary education to university programs, with a special focus on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. These areas are essential for preparing Africa's youth to thrive in the rapidly evolving global economy. By expanding initiatives like the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, and offering more scholarships to African students to study in the U.S., the U.S. can help cultivate the next generation of African leaders and professionals. These individuals, upon returning home, bring back knowledge, skills, and global networks that contribute to their nation's development. Additionally, investing in digital education platforms and online courses can make quality education accessible to a wider population, especially in rural or underserved areas. A focus on building local capacity in Africa is also essential for sustainable growth. This includes training teachers, supporting the professional development of educators, and expanding vocational training programs to ensure that African youth are equipped with the skills necessary to meet the demands of the job market. The U.S. can play a pivotal role in these efforts by collaborating with African governments, local institutions, and the private sector to develop curricula and educational frameworks that align with both local needs and global trends. Addressing the gender gap, women's empowerment in Africa. Another critical aspect of U.S.-Africa relations that deserves attention is the empowerment of women. Across Africa, women continue to face significant challenges, including limited access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. However, there is growing recognition of the importance of gender equality in achieving sustainable development. By empowering women and girls, Africa can unlock its full potential and drive economic growth, social progress, and political stability. The U.S. has the potential to be a strong partner in advancing women's rights and gender equality in Africa. Through programs that promote girls' education, support women entrepreneurs, and combat gender-based violence, the U.S. can help create an environment where African women have equal opportunities to contribute to their communities and economies. Initiatives like the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, have made significant strides in improving the health of women in Africa, but there is still much work to be done, particularly in rural areas where access to healthcare services remains limited. One promising avenue for collaboration is through supporting African women in leadership positions. As more African countries experience political transitions, the role of women in governance and leadership will be essential in shaping the continent's future. The U.S. can provide support through mentorship programs, leadership training, and by amplifying the voices of women in decision-making processes. Supporting women in politics, business, and civil society will help ensure that Africa's development is inclusive and representative of its diverse populations. Trade and investment, a renewed focus on African economies. Trade and investment will play a crucial role in reshaping U.S.-Africa relations in the coming decades. Africa's economic potential is immense, and the growth of the continent's middle class is creating new opportunities for U.S. companies to expand into African markets. However, to fully capitalize on these opportunities, the U.S. must move away from the traditional aid-based approach and instead focus on facilitating trade, investment, and entrepreneurship. African nations are increasingly looking to diversify their economies and reduce dependency on foreign aid. As the continent undergoes economic transformation, there is a strong push for industrialization, infrastructure development, and investment in key sectors such as technology, manufacturing, agriculture, and energy. The U.S. has the expertise and capital to support these efforts through investment in local businesses, joint ventures, and the development of African supply chains. Trade agreements, such as the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, have helped to foster economic ties between the U.S. and Africa, but there is room for more comprehensive and mutually beneficial agreements. The U.S. should aim to negotiate trade deals that are more inclusive, ensuring that they benefit both American and African businesses while supporting local industry development. For example, American businesses can invest in Africa's manufacturing and energy sectors, providing opportunities for job creation and infrastructure development while expanding their own reach in the growing African market. Africa's vast natural resources, combined with the global demand for products like renewable energy, mobile technology, and infrastructure materials, create a dynamic environment for trade. The U.S. can benefit from access to Africa's resources while supporting sustainable development initiatives. The continent's vast agricultural potential also presents an opportunity for cooperation in the food sector, with the U.S. providing expertise and technology to help improve food security, agricultural productivity, and value chains across Africa. Strengthening diplomatic and strategic alliances. To ensure the success of these initiatives, it is essential for the U.S. to build and maintain strong diplomatic relations with African countries. Africa is increasingly seen as a key player in global geopolitics, and its strategic alliances with global powers such as China, Russia, and the European Union will shape the continent's future. The U.S. needs to focus on strengthening its diplomatic presence in Africa, not just through government-to-government relations, but by engaging with African regional organizations, civil society, and the private sector. Africa's growing importance in global security and trade means that fostering strong diplomatic ties with African leaders will be essential in achieving broader strategic objectives. At the same time, the U.S. should be aware of the growing competition from China and Russia, both of which have been expanding their influence in Africa through economic investments and military partnerships. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, has seen it heavily involved in infrastructure projects across Africa, while Russia has established military and diplomatic ties with several African governments. The U.S. must not only strengthen its partnerships with African countries but also recognize and respect Africa's relationships with other global powers. A key area where the U.S. and Africa can collaborate strategically is in the fight against terrorism and extremism. The U.S. has been involved in counterterrorism efforts in Africa, particularly in regions like the Sahel and East Africa, but regional cooperation will be critical in ensuring long-term security. The U.S. can work with African nations to share intelligence, provide counterterrorism training, and promote regional security frameworks that can respond to emerging threats. The importance of environmental and sustainability initiatives. As Africa continues to develop, the environmental challenges it faces are becoming more pronounced. From deforestation and desertification to the impacts of climate change, Africa is particularly vulnerable to environmental degradation. The U.S. can support Africa's sustainable development goals by promoting initiatives that address environmental challenges and foster a green economy. The transition to clean energy is one of the most critical areas for cooperation. Many African nations are rich in renewable energy resources, such as solar, wind, and hydroelectric power, which could be harnessed to meet the continent's growing energy demands. The U.S., with its expertise in renewable energy technologies, can partner with African countries to help them transition to cleaner sources of energy, thus supporting both environmental and economic sustainability. Africa also faces significant challenges related to water scarcity and access to clean water. The U.S. can contribute to the development of water infrastructure, as well as support initiatives that promote water conservation and efficient irrigation systems. These efforts would not only improve the quality of life for millions of people, but also support agricultural productivity and economic growth across the continent. A new era of U.S.-Africa cooperation. The future of U.S.-Africa relations is filled with potential, but achieving this potential requires a shift in mindset and approach. Moving away from a model of aid dependency and towards one of cooperation and respect will be key in fostering sustainable partnerships between the U.S. and Africa. The challenges are significant, but so too are the opportunities for collaboration in areas such as trade, security, education, health, technology, and environmental sustainability. For the U.S., re-engaging with Africa will require recognizing the continent's growing role in global affairs and understanding the diverse needs and aspirations of its people. For Africa, the future lies in harnessing its resources, empowering its youth, and forging partnerships that are based on equality, shared interests, and sustainable development. The potential for a dynamic, productive relationship between the U.S. and Africa is vast, and the next chapter of this partnership will shape the global landscape for generations to come. As both continents work together to tackle global challenges and seize new opportunities, the possibilities for growth, prosperity, and peace are limitless. The journey towards a stronger U.S.-Africa partnership has only just begun. Promoting inclusivity and equity in U.S.-Africa relations. One of the foundational pillars of a successful and lasting partnership between the U.S. and Africa is inclusivity. The U.S. must ensure that its engagements with African nations are not only focused on political and economic elites, but also involve marginalized groups, including women, youth, rural communities, and those facing systemic discrimination. Africa's development cannot be sustainable if it leaves large portions of its population behind. 1. Empowering the youth, the future of Africa. With more than 60% of Africa's population under the age of 25, youth empowerment is not just an issue for the continent, it is an opportunity for the U.S. to invest in Africa's future. Africa's young people represent a vast, untapped reservoir of potential, innovation, and entrepreneurship. However, for these young people to thrive, they need access to quality education, employment opportunities, and platforms for expression. The U.S. can support African youth by providing scholarships, facilitating internships, and creating avenues for cultural exchange and professional development. These investments can foster skills in areas like technology, business, leadership, and the arts, which are essential for the continent's economic and social progress. The U.S. can also partner with African governments and local institutions to develop youth-focused initiatives that promote social entrepreneurship, digital literacy, and vocational training. In particular, fostering entrepreneurship among Africa's youth can be a game changer. With the rise of digital platforms, young African entrepreneurs are already leading the charge in sectors such as fintech, e-commerce, and renewable energy. The U.S. can help these young innovators by providing access to funding, mentorship, and networks that can help them scale their businesses and create jobs. 2. Tackling systemic inequality. In many African countries, systemic inequalities persist, whether based on gender, ethnicity, or economic class. These disparities prevent large segments of the population from fully participating in the economy and society, thereby hindering national development. The U.S. must prioritize working with African nations to tackle these inequalities head-on, ensuring that all citizens have equal access to opportunities. Programs aimed at improving gender equality, for example, should continue to be a priority. While significant progress has been made in areas like girls' education and women's representation in politics, challenges remain. Many women in Africa still face barriers to economic participation, from discriminatory laws to limited access to financial resources. The U.S., working with international organizations and African governments, can help implement policies that empower women and promote equal economic participation. Likewise, addressing ethnic and regional inequalities will be crucial to Africa's long-term stability and development. Many African countries experience tension between different ethnic groups, which can lead to conflict and impede national progress. The U.S. can assist in promoting inclusive governance, where all groups have a voice in the decision-making process. Supporting peace-building efforts and encouraging policies that promote social cohesion and national unity can help mitigate the risks of conflict and instability. The role of Africa in global governance. As Africa grows in economic and political significance, its role in global governance will continue to evolve. For the U.S., fostering a more inclusive and representative international system that reflects Africa's position in global affairs is critical. With its growing population, economic potential, and resources, Africa is an indispensable player in global governance, yet it remains underrepresented in key international institutions such as the United Nations Security Council, UNSC, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. The U.S., as a permanent member of the UNSC, can support Africa's push for more representation in these bodies. By advocating for African voices to be heard in global decision-making processes, the U.S. can contribute to creating a more balanced and fair international system. This also aligns with the principles of fairness, democracy, and equality, which the U.S. has long championed in its foreign policy. Facilitating Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and Climate Action Sustainable Development is at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which calls for ending poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring prosperity for all. While the U.S. has historically been a leader in supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, its involvement in climate action and sustainable development in Africa has been mixed. Climate change is one of the most urgent challenges facing Africa. While the continent is responsible for only a fraction of global carbon emissions, it is disproportionately affected by climate change, with extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and desertification threatening millions of lives. The U.S. has a critical role to play in supporting Africa's climate resilience. This includes investing in green energy solutions, promoting environmental conservation, and supporting African countries in meeting their climate targets under the Paris Agreement. Africa's potential for renewable energy is vast, with abundant solar, wind, and hydroelectric resources. The U.S. can collaborate with African nations to harness these renewable resources, reducing the continent's reliance on fossil fuels and contributing to global efforts to combat climate change. By funding sustainable projects and supporting African countries in building resilient infrastructure, the U.S. can help ensure that Africa's growth is environmentally sustainable. Moreover, addressing environmental issues is not just about mitigating climate change, it is also about promoting sustainable agriculture, forest management, and biodiversity. The U.S. can play an active role in supporting African countries in developing policies that ensure long-term environmental sustainability, which will benefit not just Africa, but the world. Enhancing regional integration and connectivity. One of Africa's key challenges is its fragmented infrastructure, which makes regional trade and economic cooperation difficult. Although the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, aims to address this by creating a single market across the continent, the lack of efficient transportation, logistics, and communication networks continues to hinder regional integration. The U.S. can be an important partner in helping Africa improve its connectivity. By investing in infrastructure projects such as roads, railways, ports, and digital networks, the U.S. can help facilitate smoother trade, better access to markets, and improved regional integration. Such infrastructure investments will benefit both the U.S. and African businesses by opening up new markets, lowering the cost of doing business, and increasing the flow of goods and services across borders. Additionally, greater regional integration will help African countries negotiate better trade deals with global powers, including the U.S. By working together as a unified economic bloc, African countries can achieve stronger bargaining power in international trade negotiations, benefiting from a larger market and more strategic trade partnerships. Rebuilding global trust through multilateral diplomacy. As the U.S. seeks to rebuild trust with Africa, multilateral diplomacy will be key. Africa's relationship with the U.S. cannot be built solely on bilateral engagements. It must also involve a broader commitment to multilateral diplomacy. Through organizations such as the African Union, AU, the United Nations, UN, and the World Trade Organization, WTO, the U.S. can work alongside African nations to address issues that affect both sides. By committing to multilateralism, the U.S. can help Africa address some of the continent's most pressing issues, such as conflicts, poverty, climate change, and health crises. Africa's representation in these forums must be strengthened, ensuring that its voice is heard in global discussions that shape the future of our world. The U.S. must also support Africa's participation in broader conversations on issues like global trade, human rights, and peacekeeping. Africa's historical experience with colonization, exploitation, and conflict gives it a unique perspective on the global order, and its voice must be integral to shaping future global governance structures. Towards a bright and collaborative future. The future of U.S.-Africa relations depends on forging a path that prioritizes mutual respect, shared values, and long-term partnerships. Africa's rise as a global economic and political power brings tremendous opportunities, not just for Africa, but for the entire world, including the United States. In the coming decades, the U.S. must be a proactive partner in Africa's growth, investing in sustainable development, regional cooperation, education, and infrastructure. This new era of U.S.-Africa relations calls for a shift in approach, one that moves away from the paternalistic tendencies of the past and embraces a more collaborative and inclusive model. By supporting Africa's sovereignty, empowering its people, and engaging in global governance, the U.S. can help shape a future where both Africa and the U.S. thrive in a spirit of cooperation, peace, and shared prosperity. Africa's future is bright, and with the right partnerships in place, the U.S. can play a crucial role in ensuring that Africa's potential is fully realized. This is the beginning of a new chapter 1 of shared goals, mutual respect, and a commitment to building a better world for future generations. The journey toward stronger U.S.-Africa relations has just begun, and it is a journey that promises to shape the global landscape for decades to come. Strengthening economic and trade relationships between the U.S. and Africa. A renewed focus on economic and trade partnerships will be key in reshaping U.S.-Africa relations. While Africa's economic potential has been widely recognized, the full benefits of trade and investment remain underexploited. In recent years, Africa has seen significant economic growth, with some countries achieving rates of growth higher than the global average. However, challenges such as infrastructure gaps, political instability, and reliance on natural resource exports remain. The U.S. has an important role to play in supporting African countries in diversifying their economies and expanding beyond raw material exports. Africa's growing middle class, increasing urbanization, and rising demand for goods and services present an opportunity for both African countries and U.S. businesses. By strengthening trade and investment ties, the U.S. can support Africa's efforts to build more resilient, diversified economies. Leveraging the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. One of the most notable frameworks for promoting U.S.-Africa trade is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which has been in effect since 2000. AGOA offers duty-free access to the U.S. market for a variety of African exports, including textiles, agricultural products, and manufactured goods. While AGOA has contributed to growth in African exports to the U.S., its potential remains underutilized by many African nations. The U.S. can work with African countries to help them fully take advantage of AGOA by improving their trade infrastructure, capacity for value-added manufacturing, and standards for exports. By aligning AGOA with Africa's broader goals of industrialization and economic diversification, the U.S. can assist in creating a more equitable and sustainable trading relationship. Furthermore, the U.S. can support initiatives to improve intra-African trade through the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA. The AFCFTA is a landmark agreement that aims to create a single market for goods and services across the continent. Supporting the implementation of the AFCFTA will not only enhance Africa's internal market but also make it easier for U.S. companies to do business on the continent by providing a more cohesive and integrated economic space. Facilitating green growth and renewable energy investments. Africa's future growth is intrinsically tied to the shift towards a more sustainable, low-carbon economy. As the global focus on climate change intensifies, the U.S. can play an important role in helping Africa transition to renewable energy and green technologies. Africa is home to some of the world's most abundant sources of renewable energy, particularly solar, wind, and hydroelectric power. With the right investments and policy frameworks, Africa can leapfrog traditional fossil fuel-based development models and become a leader in green energy. The U.S. has significant expertise in renewable energy technologies, and through partnerships with African nations, it can support the development of clean energy infrastructure. This includes investments in solar energy projects, wind farms, and energy storage solutions, as well as improvements in energy efficiency. The U.S. can also assist in developing the regulatory frameworks necessary to attract private sector investments in renewable energy projects, ensuring that Africa's transition to green energy is both economically viable and environmentally sustainable. By prioritizing green growth, the U.S. can help African countries address energy poverty, reduce carbon emissions, and create new economic opportunities. This aligns with the broader goals of sustainable development and climate action, contributing to global efforts to combat climate change. Fostering digital transformation in Africa. Another area where the U.S. can make a substantial impact in Africa is through digital transformation. The digital economy is rapidly expanding across the continent, and Africa is home to some of the world's most dynamic technology hubs, particularly in cities like Nairobi, Lagos, and Cape Town. These hubs are driving innovation in areas such as fintech, e-commerce, and mobile technology, creating exciting opportunities for both African entrepreneurs and global investors. However, there are still significant challenges to scaling Africa's digital economy, including limited access to reliable internet, insufficient digital infrastructure, and gaps in digital skills. The U.S. can support Africa's digital transformation by investing in infrastructure projects, particularly in the areas of broadband internet connectivity and mobile networks. This can help bridge the digital divide, allowing more people to access online services and participate in the global economy. Additionally, the U.S. can collaborate with African governments and local tech startups to promote digital literacy and entrepreneurship. By fostering a supportive environment for innovation and providing resources for tech entrepreneurs, the U.S. can help unlock Africa's vast digital potential. Moreover, the U.S. can share its expertise in areas such as cybersecurity, data privacy, and digital governance, ensuring that Africa's digital economy is secure, sustainable, and inclusive. Increasing Africa's access to global financial markets. As Africa's economies continue to grow, access to finance becomes increasingly critical. Many African countries face challenges in accessing global capital markets, which hinders their ability to invest in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. The U.S. can help by facilitating greater access to international financial markets for African nations, particularly through partnerships with global financial institutions. One area where the U.S. can assist is in the development of African capital markets. By providing technical assistance and expertise in financial market regulation, the U.S. can help African countries strengthen their financial systems and attract foreign investment. Additionally, the U.S. can encourage private sector investments in African businesses and infrastructure projects, creating opportunities for job creation and economic growth. The U.S. can also work with African nations to develop financial tools that support climate resilience and sustainable development. Green bonds, for example, could be used to finance renewable energy projects, while social bonds could be used to fund initiatives related to health, education, and poverty alleviation. By leveraging the financial expertise of U.S. institutions, Africa can unlock the capital necessary to achieve its development goals. Promoting stability and peace in Africa. Security remains a significant concern in many parts of Africa, with ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crises in regions such as the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and the Great Lakes region. The U.S. has a long-standing commitment to supporting peacekeeping efforts in Africa through both bilateral and multilateral initiatives. However, the nature of conflict in Africa is evolving, and a more comprehensive approach is needed to address the root causes of instability, such as poverty, governance failures, and regional rivalries. The U.S. can work alongside African governments, the African Union, AU, and regional organizations to build the capacity of African peacekeeping forces and improve early warning systems for conflict prevention. By strengthening African peacekeeping capabilities and fostering regional cooperation, the U.S. can help ensure that Africa's security challenges are addressed more effectively. Moreover, the U.S. can play a role in supporting post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation efforts, particularly in countries emerging from civil war or political instability. This involves not only rebuilding infrastructure, but also supporting governance reforms, promoting social cohesion, and ensuring that marginalized communities are included in the political process. Addressing health challenges and strengthening health systems. Health remains one of the most pressing issues facing Africa today, with the continent facing a high burden of diseases such as malaria, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and increasingly non-communicable diseases like diabetes and hypertension. While significant progress has been made in improving access to healthcare and reducing the spread of infectious diseases, challenges remain in providing universal health coverage and addressing health system weaknesses. The U.S. can play a key role in strengthening Africa's health systems by continuing its support for initiatives like PEPFAR, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which has saved millions of lives since its inception. In addition, the U.S. can partner with African countries to improve access to essential health services, particularly in rural areas, and support the development of local health infrastructures, such as hospitals, clinics, and health workforce training. As the COVID-19 pandemic has shown, global health challenges require coordinated responses. The U.S. can work with African countries to ensure that they are better prepared for future health emergencies, including by strengthening disease surveillance, supporting vaccine production, and enhancing the capacity of public health systems. A vision for long-term U.S.-Africa cooperation. In the years ahead, the future of U.S.-Africa relations will depend on building long-term, sustainable partnerships that go beyond short-term interests. Both sides must focus on a shared vision of growth, peace, and prosperity, one that addresses Africa's challenges while also seizing the many opportunities the continent offers. This requires a commitment to promoting inclusive economic growth, investing in education, fostering sustainable development, and addressing security challenges. By doing so, the U.S. and Africa can create a partnership that benefits not only both regions, but also the world. The key to a successful future lies in mutual respect, shared goals, and collaboration. The U.S. can be a key partner in Africa's continued development, but this can only happen through a genuine commitment to supporting African aspirations and prioritizing Africa's voice in global conversations. With this renewed approach, the U.S. and Africa can unlock a future of prosperity, stability, and cooperation that benefits not only the two continents, but the entire world. The path forward is clear. By working together, Africa and the U.S. can forge a partnership for the future, one based on trust, respect, and shared progress. As the U.S. and Africa continue to navigate the complexities of a rapidly changing global landscape, the potential for meaningful collaboration remains vast. Africa's role as a rising global power cannot be ignored, and the U.S. can be a crucial partner in Africa's development journey. However, this partnership must be built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and long-term sustainable goals. The key lies in embracing a collaborative approach, one that recognizes the strengths and challenges of both regions and seeks to build upon them for mutual benefit. For Africa, the future is bright, with opportunities for growth, innovation, and development. However, realizing these opportunities requires a steadfast commitment to improving governance, fostering inclusivity, and creating an environment where entrepreneurship and innovation can thrive. By focusing on human capital, investing in education and technology, and prioritizing green and sustainable development, Africa can unlock its full potential. For the U.S., the task is equally clear: to foster deeper, more strategic partnerships with African nations that go beyond aid and address the continent's long-term needs. This means focusing on trade, investment, infrastructure, and innovation, while supporting Africa's leadership in regional and global governance. It also means acknowledging Africa's diverse political and social landscapes and ensuring that the partnership prioritizes African aspirations and solutions. Advice to African leaders. African leaders must embrace the opportunities that come with global partnerships, but they must also ensure that Africa's voice remains central to the continent's development agenda. Africa's future lies in its ability to harness its resources, human, natural, and technological, while ensuring that these resources benefit all segments of society, not just a select few. The continent's young population presents a remarkable opportunity for growth, but this potential can only be realized if leaders invest in education, technology, and skills development. Moreover, African leaders should prioritize regional integration and collaboration, fostering stronger ties between African nations to create a unified, collective voice in global governance. This will not only enhance Africa's bargaining power on the world stage, but also provide a more solid foundation for sustainable economic growth and political stability. At the same time, African leaders must remain vigilant in promoting good governance, transparency, and accountability. The fight against corruption, the protection of human rights, and the strengthening of democratic institutions are crucial for creating an environment where all citizens can thrive. By leading with integrity, African leaders can build trust, not only with their own people, but with the international community. Finally, African leaders should seize the opportunity to lead on global issues such as climate change, technology, and sustainable development. Africa has the resources, the ambition, and the potential to become a leader in these fields, with the US and other global partners as key collaborators. Summary of key messages: 1. Strategic partnerships for growth. The future of US-Africa relations depends on a collaborative, long-term approach that prioritizes sustainable economic growth, trade, innovation, and inclusive development. 2. Inclusive development. Africa's development must be inclusive, addressing the needs of women, youth, marginalized communities, and the continent's diverse populations. A focus on education, healthcare, and access to resources will unlock Africa's full potential. 3. Investing in youth. With a rapidly growing youth population, Africa's future is inextricably linked to empowering young people through education, entrepreneurship, and leadership development. Both the US and African nations must work together to create opportunities for Africa's youth. 4. Fostering regional integration. Strengthening intra-Africa trade, infrastructure, and regional cooperation will enhance Africa's position in the global economy and provide greater leverage in international negotiations. 5. Climate action and sustainability. The US and Africa must collaborate on climate change and environmental sustainability, focusing on renewable energy, green growth, and addressing the impacts of climate change, which disproportionately affect African nations. 6. Promoting governance and peace. Strong, accountable governance is the bedrock of Africa's growth. By prioritizing peace, democracy, and regional cooperation, African leaders can create a stable foundation for economic and social development. 7. Global influence. Africa's increasing geopolitical importance should be reflected in greater representation in global decision-making bodies. African nations should work together to ensure their voice is heard in shaping global governance. 8. Renewed U.S. engagement. The U.S. must shift towards a more strategic, mutually beneficial partnership with Africa, one that moves beyond aid and embraces investment, trade, innovation, and sustainable development. In conclusion, the relationship between the U.S. and Africa is at a pivotal moment. By embracing a forward-thinking, collaborative approach and focusing on sustainable, inclusive development, both sides can achieve tremendous success. Africa's growth offers immense promise, and with the right partnerships and leadership, the continent can become a key player in the global economy, politics, and culture. The future of U.S.-Africa relations is not just an opportunity, it is an imperative. Thanks for tuning in to The Bold African Voice, BAV. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis and the latest news on Africa and beyond. What do you think about Trump's comments on Lesotho? Join the conversation in the comments below, and let's keep pushing the boundaries of understanding. Until next time, stay bold and stay informed.